Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're just going to start our Facebook live stream. Welcome to PHS Live, everyone. We're so grateful that you could join us all here today to learn about the Religious News Service collection housed here at the Presbyterian Historical Society. You're also going to hear a little bit about the RNS Digitization pilot project, which was a grant that we received from the National Endowment for the Humanities to digitize a portion of that collection a few years ago. And you're also going to hear a little bit today about the current work of the Religion News Service and a little bit about our collaboration with the current day RNS. During today's session, you'll hear from PHS Executive Director Nancy J. Taylor, Director of Programs and Services Natalie Shilstedt, Digital Collections Specialist Allison Davis, and our special guest tonight, Religion News Photo Editor Kit Doyle. Before we begin, I just have a few notes about the session. If you have any questions that pop up during the session, you're welcome to submit them in the Q&A, and you can find that at the bottom of your screen. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session to answer any questions that you might have. The session is being recorded and streamed on Facebook. After tonight, the session will be published to our YouTube page and to our PHS website. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy J. Taylor, who is going to share a little bit about the RNS collection.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you everyone for joining us. I am going to give an overview of the Religious News Service collections that we hold here at the Presbyterian Historical Society, just a little bit about the founding of RNS, and then the 5 decades of the collections that are covered here. So that's really from the 1930s to the early 1980s. And we're going to be focusing mainly on the photo collection, but we have a larger group of materials, so I'll just say a little bit about that as well. In the 19th and early 20th centuries here in the United States, most religious news was distributed through denominational outlets. And it was in 1934 that the National Council of Christians and Jews really did one of the first intentional efforts to disseminate depictions of religious life to a broader based national and global audience. As I said, our collection here spans 5 decades of that collaborative effort. And the NCCJ, the National Council of Christians and Jews, and the Religious News Service, they were really committed to what they called reliable and bias-free religious news. And they disseminated things primarily during this time to newspapers, but also to radio stations across the United States. And the effort was one of education and information, so really targeted to Americans. And it looked at the gamut of religious experiences at that time, focused primarily on Protestants, Roman Catholics, Jewish religion, and Eastern Orthodox, but there are kind of stories and images about religious practices that don't fall into those primary categories, and those are both in the United States and globally. Some of the major topics that were covered during this time, we're going to focus on the photographs, and the photo service itself started in 1945. So one of the primary early areas of coverage was the impact of World War II. Refugees that were moving globally as a result of the war, as it was ending, the destruction of church buildings and the rebuilding effort, in particular in Europe, but also in East Asia. There was also kind of rebuilding of religious communities in the wake of the war and how things were transformed, and immigration, waves of immigration that really continued well into the 1950s and beyond. The collection looks at both topical things like the impact of war and protest movement, social justice, but it does cover what you might think of as more traditional religious news. So that is religious conferences, conventions, ecumenical gatherings, including the National Council of Churches, the World Council of Churches. There's a focus on religious leaders like Pope John the 23rd. The Reverend Billy Graham is very well covered in our collections, and Dr. Martin Luther King. So those are just some of the religious leaders that are well covered. And there's a really good portrayal of what I would call social justice related issues. So one of the first things that the staff was really diving into the collections to access was coverage of the civil rights movement. And so this did involve folks like King, but then other leaders from different faith traditions that were involved in civil rights demonstrations and movements and conferences, and all of that is covered in our collections. Also, you can trace the emergence of the religious right. As we get into the mid to late 60s, there are demonstrations against the Vietnam War, but also kind of the impact that the war was having in the United States, in Asia and in other areas, how that is being covered and what religious leaders are saying about it. There's coverage of nuclear proliferation and demonstrations against that. Even as you get to the very end of our collection here, there's great coverage and images on the Iranian hostage crisis, the conflict in Northern Ireland, and the persecution of Jews in the Soviet Union. So across this time span, there's just a wealth of information, both related to particular faith practices and denominational structures and leaders, but also to larger political, cultural, social issues, and how those are reflected through a prism of organized religion and religious practice. So in 1984, the NCCJ decided to transfer ownership of the Religious News Service to, at that time, the United Methodist Reporter. And it was at that time the decision was made to fully gift the ownership of the collections, most of the collected material at that time, to the Presbyterian Historical Society. And we took in a total of 621 boxes of material, cubic foot boxes. So the collection is very extensive. In addition to the photographs, the prints, the negatives, the press release material that went out with those photographs, and that's what we're going to focus on, Allison and Natalie, but there also is a series of press clippings, press releases, subject files, and other textual material that documents the coverage that RNS put out. Our photographs span the years from 1945, which is when the photo service was officially started, to 1982. And in terms of the photographs themselves, they're a mix of what you might think of candid snapshots, journalistic images, so images that were taken in order to supplement news coverage. There are some, what I would call more kind of artistic aesthetic images to try to represent a particular moment in history or cultural kind of event or happening. And then there are a lot of arranged portraits and group shots. So it really runs the gamut between what I would call staged photo opportunities and more journalistic and candid images. And I'm going to turn it over now to Natalie. She is going to talk in particular about our 2018 grant from the National Endowment for Humanities and how that allowed us to both digitize a selection of images from the RNS collection, describe them, and make them much more accessible to researchers and other interested people. So Natalie.
Thank you, Nancy. So we knew for a long time that the RNS photographs were a great candidate for a grant project. The collection, as Nancy illustrated, is historically rich and significant, but it is difficult to access in its current state, and it's at risk of rapid deterioration due to the acetate negatives and acidic paper that is found inside the collection. So we wanted to do a better job preserving and providing access to the photographs. Given the size of the collection, we wanted to develop a system for prioritizing certain photographs for digitization. And we also knew that this project would require staffing and resources beyond what we had. We needed assistance from subject matter experts, given that this collection is not focused just on Presbyterian or even Protestant history. It covers numerous religious groups and denominations, including Catholicism and Judaism. We also needed guidance on how to deal with the deteriorating acetate negatives and help with navigating intellectual property issues to ensure that the project would be in compliance with copyright law. What we knew we could contribute on our own was the work of the pilot digitization project. So we already had a digital archives and an on-site digitization program. So we decided to dedicate a portion of staff time to digitizing, describing, and providing access to the images online. And with all of this in mind, we applied twice for an NEH Humanities Collections and Reference Resources grant. And on the second try in 2018, we were awarded a $44,000 foundations grant. So the primary goal for the grant project was to develop a 3-tier 5-point rating system that would help us prioritize the images for digitization, preservation, and access, and then to test that rating system during a pilot digitization project that would be scalable in the future so that we could eventually digitize a much larger number of photographs. And we would apply the rating system to 5 boxes of photographs, randomly selecting 1 box from each decade, and then scan the top 500 rated images, and then finally describe and add those images to Pearl, which is the name of our digital archives. And the final phase of the project would include publicizing and sharing about the project. To develop the rating system, we recruited a panel of experts that included academic historians and scholars, a photograph conservator, and a copyright attorney. The 5 academics and scholars that served on the panel included experts in US Catholic history, immigration and Jewish history, ecumenical and social justice history, and 20th century journalism. And throughout the project, the staff worked closely with the panel to develop the rating system, which had 3 criteria to assess: first, historical significance, the physical condition of the photographs and negatives, and the documentation quality of the images. And I'll briefly touch on how we developed each one of these criteria. To develop the historical significance criteria, the panel had to think about what makes an image historically significant and how do you even quantify that in an objective way. So it was a difficult question to answer, but it was also very engaging for the panel to talk about and work through together. We held several meetings where we reviewed and discussed similar projects that were conducted by other institutions in the past, and we reviewed sample photo files together as well. And at the conclusion of those discussions, the panel lifted up 3 qualities they felt made images more historically significant. And those were an element of action, more than one quality story, and the portrayal of an underrepresented religious group. And images that contained all three of these elements were rated a 4 out of 5. And the panel also decided that the addition of a high aesthetic or compositional quality would give an image the highest possible score of a 5. So you'll see in this chart the criteria we came up with for the lower scores as well. What we discovered when sampling the collection was a good number of photographs that were used by RNS as essentially stock photography. So a lot of generic headshots and images of buildings or artwork and so forth. The second criteria we looked at was the physical condition of the negatives and photographs. A lot of the negatives in this collection up until the 1980s are acetate format, and acetate begins to deteriorate in predictable ways over time, such as bubbling up, breaking, and warping, as is illustrated in the image on the right. And we wanted to prioritize images that were at the most risk for further deterioration. So to determine this, we relied on photograph conservator Barbara Lemon, who prepared a report for the advisory panel that outlined how to prioritize photographs and negatives based on their format and their current physical condition and state of deterioration. Because the photo files usually contain both negatives and prints, we needed to determine which format was the closest to the original. For pre-digital photography, that should be a negative, which is used to produce a photographic print. But during the course of the project, we discovered that the negatives in the collection were actually copy negatives, meaning they were images taken of a photograph rather than an original negative that comes out of a camera and is used to develop a photographic print. So this meant that in most cases, the print was actually the preferred image format to scan, and the condition of the negative became less important and even allowed us to dispose of some of the extremely deteriorated negatives in cases where a good quality print was available. After determining the format we would be scanning, we then needed to look at the physical condition and evidence of deterioration of the negative or print. So we would assess the level of deterioration based on a chart like this one and give it a condition rating. And the goal here was to prioritize scanning acetate negatives that were just beginning to show signs of deterioration in order to capture a good image before it was obscured by further deterioration. Then Barbara combined these two components into this final chart that we used to assign a final condition rating to the images. And the end result was that we would be prioritizing acetate negatives that did not have a print version and had just begun to show signs of deterioration. The third and final criteria we looked at was documentation quality. For this, we considered the amount of information available inside the photo files and whether that provided adequate historical context to interpret the images. In most cases, each photo file contains a 1-paragraph caption, but occasionally there are additional related materials such as newspaper clippings, press releases, other ephemera like pamphlets and brochures. And in rare cases, the only available documentation is a brief title that is handwritten on the envelope or in the log books that accompany the collection. And an example of one of those log books is in the middle of this slide. And it basically just includes a chronological listing of the photographs, usually with a brief title, a date, and a photographer name. But in some cases, the log book will not contain any information other than a photo file number and a date, and the photo file itself will only include the photograph or negative. For the documentation quality criteria, we also looked at whether it was possible to confirm the copyright status, the photographer's name, and the current rights holder. Because the images were created between the 1940s and 80s, we understood that the majority of them would still be protected by copyright unless the photographer was a government agency. We also knew that RNS typically purchased images with a one-use license, and either the photographer who took the image a wire service or another organization retained the copyright. So we needed to start the project with the assumption that the majority of these images would still be in copyright. There are several locations where photographer and credit information could potentially be found as listed in these scenarios here. So part of assessing documentation quality involved looking for this information and making an assessment of how clear the rights information was. And I'll also add that before we even applied for this grant, we wanted to confirm that this type of project would be possible given the potential copyright restrictions and complications. So prior to, Okay, here we are. So prior to submitting our grant application, we consulted with an intellectual property attorney, Laura Genovese, who later joined the advisory panel. And Laura confirmed that there was precedent for this type of digitization project, and she determined that we could digitize and provide access to the images as long as we followed certain procedures, such as only providing access to low resolution versions of images, providing clear rights statements along with the images, and including a takedown notice. The final criteria we ultimately came up with for the documentation quality favored images with detailed documentation and clear photographer credits. And in practice, this meant that photo files with accompanying materials were often rated the highest because the additional documentation helped to strengthen narratives around the image, which oftentimes also had the effect of strengthening the historical significance rating. And once we defined the 3 tiers of the rating system, we needed to come up with a formula for combining them into one final rating. The panel decided that historical significance should be the deciding factor in choosing what to scan. So we achieved this goal by weighting historical significance higher in certain cases. So when the historical significance rating for an image was a 4 or a 5, we would multiply that by 2. And then the rating for the 3 criteria would be combined and averaged to get the final score. And once our rating system was finalized, our next step was to test it on a selection of boxes. So again, we randomly chose 1 box from each decade, and we ended up reviewing a total of 1,315 images. Nancy and I were the 2 staff members who applied the rating system to the collection. We started the process by working together to make sure we were consistently making similar decisions in our interpretation of the various criteria. And so we could just talk through any questions that came up. And at the end of the appraisal process, we ended up with a total of 493 images that were selected for scanning. Surprisingly, there were more images that rated a 3, and 4s and 5s were not quite as prevalent in this sampling of images. And then once those images were selected, we needed to develop a workflow for rehousing the photo files in archival quality folders to reduce the risk of any further deterioration. We also needed to refine our existing workflows for scanning the images and the related materials in the photo files, describing that content and displaying everything online in accordance with the copyright constraints that our legal counsel identified. And all of that rehousing, digitization, description, and work in the digital archives was done on site by the PHS staff. And Allison Davis was one of the staff members who did all of that work. So I will turn it over to her so she can showcase some of the RNS images that were selected and part of this pilot project.
Thank you. All right, let's show some images. Okay. Hi everyone, I am Allison Davis and I am currently the digital collection specialist here at PHS. So I'm going to show some highlights from the photograph collection and just here on the screen, we have 3 diverse examples of what we encountered while scanning. So for the grant, I was one of 2 staff members who worked on the physical scanning of the photographs along with transcribing the original captions and then creating detailed descriptions for the images. So like Natalie mentioned, we scanned almost 500 images altogether along with their accompanying captions. And then this image right here is a small glimpse of the physical collection in our archive, but in total we have over 200 boxes. So the images we scanned were spread out across 5 decades. They originated from the years 1948, 1955, 1965, 1971, and 1980. Like Natalie mentioned, some of the photo files had other documents with them, such as press releases, news clippings, correspondence, other various texts. My slide here is an example of that scenario. So here's a photograph taken at the second biennial convention of the National Temperance Movement, along with the original caption for the image and then an actual program from the convention. So we scanned all of these textual resources because they really provided researchers with further historical context. So all of the images that we scanned for the grant are now available in Pearl, which is our online digital archive. This here is a screenshot of what an object in Pearl looks like. So you can view the digital image along with the transcription of the original caption, and then also the descriptive metadata, which includes information such as the photographer, the date, and relevant subject headings. But just for the sake of time today, I will only be showing the images in my slide. But I want to emphasize that they are all available online with their full captions and descriptions. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly show you some interesting images from the collection to give you a sense of the variety of content in the photograph collection. I'm going to begin with a really broad theme of social and political issues. Like I mentioned, these images range from 1948 to 1980. And one pattern that we noticed was that the content of the news coverage kind of shifted over time, and much of the earlier RNS material, specifically from 1948 and 1955, was less overtly political or controversial. In addition, that earlier coverage focused a lot on the Catholic Church more than other denominations. But as time progressed, the organization photographed heavier and more graphic historical events, such as the aftermaths of bombings or riots or war. So this image here is titled Arrested, and this is from 1971, and it shows Father James Groppe. He was a civil rights activist priest from Milwaukee, and this is him being taken into custody during an anti-war demonstration right near the White House. Here, this is a photograph of German children receiving food provided by Hilfswerk, a Protestant relief agency in the American zone of the country. A good number of the photographs that we scanned from 1948 focused on the aftermath of World War II. I love this one. Here we have a shot of part of a crowd of 25,000 marchers moving along Chicago's lakefront in support of the Equal Rights Amendment. This is a photo of 813 refugees originating from 11 different countries aboard the U.S. Army Transport General Black in New York. This moment shows members of peace groups from New York City holding a brief memorial service in Lafayette Park for those killed in Vietnam. And then afterwards, about 150 demonstrators crossed Pennsylvania Avenue and tried to gain access to the White House to deliver to the president a list of names of Vietnamese people who lost their lives. And then after they, were denied entry, the group staged a lion in the driveway. So this is that moment. Here we have some costume participants in Atlanta's Earth Day observance, and they are gathering on the Capitol steps in 1980. This is a photograph of Cuban refugees arriving in Mariel Harbor in Key West, Florida, with the help of members of the Southern Baptist Church who were working actively to help resettle them in America. Okay, up next, I will show a few examples of some US and world leaders that we encountered while scanning the photographs. This one's funny. This is Vice President Nixon listening to the Little Singers of Paris, who were a French boys choir, who were on a nationwide tour of the US then. This is an image of Mother Teresa holding a child in 1971 India. So this photo documents President Syngman Rhee speaking at his inauguration as the first president of the Republic of Korea. This is August 15th, 1948. Here we have Queen Elizabeth and other top church leaders attending a ceremony in London, which launched a 10-day observance of the Salvation Army's 100th anniversary. So one interesting component of the photograph collection is that it didn't solely document massive congregations, such as Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Instead, the collection contained numerous examples of faith occurring in unlikely places. A really good example of that is Our Lady of the Skies, which is a fantastic name for the then new chapel at the New York International Airport. This is a church that was built from rubble in the American zone of Germany. This is the time of the cornerstone laying ceremony. And this church was sponsored by the World Council of Churches, which was a relief organization. So this is a chapel that was carved from solid salt deep within a salt mine in Poland, and the men who were praying at the altar are miners at the mine. The city, New Mexico, with a population then of approximately 8,000, was created specifically for the purpose of assembling atomic bombs, and they built their own church. And this is a photo of the Wildy family. The three Wildys were the only members of Zion Methodist Church, a royal church in Illinois. So evidently no congregation was too small to be spotlighted by RNS. So this was a really small sample of what we have scanned and made available to the public in Pearl. So I do encourage you to check some out of the other 400 plus images in the collection. You know, these photographs are a really remarkable visual record that helps trace a transformative period in religion, culture, politics, and society in the 20th century. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity provided by NEH to share these images and, you know, just share them with the public. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Kit Doyle now. Stop my share.
Thank you. And just as she said, we are so thankful that this has been made possible through NEH and with PHS. We've been thrilled at RNS to work with the Presbyterian Historical Society the last few years, especially since this digitization has been able to happen, because it's been an awesome resource for our readers and for us as a staff to be able to look back when we need to research something. So we've loved working with PHS, and we look forward to continuing to work with them. I will start a slideshow, and for the other presenters, I can't see anything. So if it's not working, please just interrupt me with audio. All right. So Religion News Service, as has been mentioned already, was founded in 1934. We strive to inform, illuminate, and inspire public discourse on matters relating to belief and convictions. I'll discuss that more in a second. Please visit us at religionnews.com, or you can find us on social media. Yeah, we'd love for you to read some of what we produce and get your feedback. So RNS is an independent nonprofit news organization. To clarify that, we are not affiliated with any particular religion or denomination, and we cover religion, spirituality, belief, non-belief. Yeah, we cover just about everything if it's in the realm of beliefs. So that's a screenshot of our homepage from a day or two ago, and so we offer a variety of news products, news articles, features, news analysis, opinion, podcasts. How do I make that go away? Oops, oh Lord. One feature that related to PHS is our photos of the week that regularly, stop going there. Sorry about that. I don't know how to make that go away. Photos of the week is a regular feature that happens every week, comes out on Friday night or Saturday morning, and features just modern photos as well as some reader submitted photos, and additionally archival photos, generally from PHS. And that's oftentimes it's related to what's going on. We might have some, we might have had some Christmas photos a few months ago, or we might have some Easter ones coming up, or Lent right now. So it's oftentimes related to what's going on in the world. So from a, you can hear my daughter perhaps in the background. We've, in addition to use of PHS archival images in stories, we also have joined with them for a new Instagram account, RNS@PHS. Please follow us. And it just is a lot of the images that you're seeing today and selections from Pearl. So, so archival use, I'm trying to think of how we largely use images from PHS. A ton of it is for big anniversaries or major events. Billy Graham died a few years ago. That was, I mean, he was the face of American evangelicalism in the 20th century. So we did a ton of coverage about him, used a lot of archival images. Additionally, for major anniversaries, such as the assassination of MLK. So some things from Pearl or from PHS that we've used before. Billy Graham in a large gathering, as most of his were. In 1955, news of MLK's assassin being captured in 1968. And then we've used some JFK stuff more recently, as Biden is the second Catholic president. We've gone back to, some stories about JFK and the first Catholic president and some of the hurdles he had along the way. So next, I was just going to go through a few personal favorites of mine. I love this. We used this recently, and this was a hot rod club from Oakland in 1955, and they were the Heaven Pacers of the East Bay Hot Rod Club. I don't have particular exact reasons for why I like certain ones, but I think just the aesthetics of how the painter's arm is going in the direction that the individuals within the painting are reaching out in the same direction. I really like that. And then there's just some great random photos as well, such as, lots of times they're about big meetings or big individuals, but then you'll get some gems like this Southern Baptist Mission congregation in rural Tennessee in 1965. As they've talked about before, there's a lot from post-World War II, such as these displaced individuals in Arkansas. This has been one of my favorites that we have used, and it's just a hunting club having a Bible study early one morning in South Dakota. And the gentleman in the very middle with those great boots, things like that, I love having resources like this to illustrate what it was at the time. US soldiers praying in Vietnam. There's quite a bit in, as they've mentioned previously, there's a lot from different conflicts over the years. And then there's very fun things like some hounds being blessed. It's 48. You've already probably seen this one quickly, but or in passing from Allison's, but some nuns biking and skating in New Orleans was just a beautiful shot. And American Protestants visit Red Square in Moscow in 1956. Obviously, we've been covering a lot of Russia and Ukraine and Orthodoxy, and with everything that's going on right now. And again, back to some fun ones. Archery lessons for nuns in 55. And this was, I just think, a beautiful shot of this Congolese band for Salvation Army's 100th anniversary in 65. And another just very poignant, beautiful moment of a young girl as they collect items for to send down to Selma, Alabama. And I like this one. It might be difficult to see, but a plane had written "Stop War" over Shea Stadium during the World Series in 1969. Very interesting. So with this, we see a lot of, in terms of news coverage, we see recurring themes over the decades. And although, RNS is coming up on 90 years old, some things stay the same. There's been, there will regularly be Israeli and Palestinian coverage. So here is some individuals protesting Israeli settlements in the West Bank in 1980. And then some Jews praying outside the Ibrahimi Mosque or the Cave of the Patriarchs also in 1980. And then I thought I'd do some side-by-side of how things, kind of just to show how things change. Notre Dame, which we saw this one earlier from 1955, and then when it had the massive fire in 2019. So we used some archival images, to show the rich history of Notre Dame, and then obviously had a lot of coverage after the fire happened. Rattlesnakes are great for visuals, although the actual amount of individuals who use rattlesnakes in worship, I think, is incredibly small. But on the left from 1946 and on the right from about 2013, it's just I don't think it would ever get old to take a photo of a preacher holding some rattlesnakes. This was on the right is Pope Francis speaking against the Russian invasion of Ukraine, just I think on February 27th, I believe. And then on the left, Pope Paul VI speaking specifically against nuclear war in 65. Just it's so interesting to see how, in some ways, history repeats itself. Similarly, themes that are recurring, but how issues morph and change over time. Abortion rights demonstrations from 71 and this year on the right is in DC and on the left is in Texas. And then on the opposite side of that same argument is anti-abortion demonstrations. And that's March for Life on the left this year, and also in DC on the right in 71. So, and abortion is just an interesting issue that obviously has very deep religious ties, but it has also morphed in how it is understood and how political it is. And then again, back to how much, unfortunately, some things stay the same. Displaced persons or refugees from World War II in 48. And then after the US left Afghanistan last year in 2021, the way that in both photos, the people are kind of exiting, one the ship, one the other the plane, but in similar fashions, was very intriguing to me. That those gangplanks or gangways are kind of similar, and then also with refugees from North Vietnam in 54 on the left, with a woman carrying a child, and they're having their belongings with them, and the modern day version on the right in Ukraine, fleeing Ukraine. I think this is in Hungary, actually, after people have left Ukraine just last week. So that is the end of my presentation. If I can stop sharing. Let's see here. Escape. And my apologies. Where is the mouse? Kristen, are you able to stop my sharing?
Let me see. I think I should be able to.
Otherwise, we might be stuck.
There we go. Well, thank you, Kit.
Thank you.
It was really awesome hearing about the work of RNS, and especially about some of the collaborations that we've been doing over the past couple of years. We have some time for questions, and I think we've had a few that have come in. So the first question is from Cheryl, and Cheryl is wondering, are there boxes in the RNS photograph collection that have never been examined? And if so, when will you look through and process the additional materials, and will a grant be needed?
Yes, Cheryl, I would say maybe the lid has been lifted and all of the boxes have at least been looked into, but there are definitely enclosures with photographic material in them that I would say at least no one on PHS staff since 1984 and no researchers have probably looked at. We will need a grant, and just because of the sheer size of the photograph collection, 60,000 plus images in 227 boxes. And our plan right now is to apply back to the National Endowment for the Humanities for an implementation grant. And so that would be a larger amount of money, which would let us expand the pilot project and digitize more images and make them available. There are other potential places we can apply for grants. So right now we're in the process of figuring out next steps, and we're so happy that we have developed a close relationship with Religion News Service, because a lot of the granting agencies really look for that kind of collaboration and how a digitization project, what kind of impact will it have? And I think we can demonstrate, even from what we've done so far, that this continuing to work on this and continuing to digitize historic images and to get them out there through Religion News Service and other ways that media and scholars are using them, the impact is huge. And I think we make a really good case. So stay tuned.
At any point in the process of the pilot digitization program, during the appraisal or the digitization, did you stumble on any images that shocked or surprised you? And that could mean in terms of controversial events or topics, or just unexpected things. And did those images impact your decision-making during the rating system?
I'll just say, I was not expecting a subgenre of Catholic nuns like doing random activities, like, you know, shooting bow and arrow. There's one shot of them teaching like high school football, like on a submarine. So that was
yeah, the submarine one comes to mind.
Yeah.
You're spot on with like, wow, these Catholic nuns in very
yeah,
surprising
yeah. And it just
locales.
happened. Yeah, it just happened to be that me and Cecilia, the person who did the scanning, we separated the work, and I took on the earlier years. So I dealt with a lot of the Catholic material, which is how I saw so many nun shots. And then Cecilia took on the later stuff, which could get pretty heavy. And it didn't happen too many times, but in the 71 and 1980 shots, we did find some incredibly violent things, which is automatically shocking. But it forced us to reconsider how we would display that image in Pearl. For anyone to just stumble upon that image it's not what we wanted to happen. So in response to that, we have hid the image both in the actual record and a thumbnail for search results. So you're not stumbling across like a graphic image of a dead body or a seriously maimed human being, but the description is still available. So if you did want to see access, still you'd have to just contact our staff to do that. But yeah, that was definitely shocking on a completely different end than the nuns doing stuff.
Many of the photos are not religious, but more related to social justice or current events. RNS has great photos, but how did you get the name with religious in it?
I am not positive I understand. So how did our founder originally name it Religious News Service? I'm not sure. As Nancy spoke to, like it was started out of I'm not going to get the name correct, Nancy, the National Council of
Christians and Jews, right?
So the intent was always to distribute religious-based content, as opposed to other news wires that would cover, whatever might be happening politically. Let's say like RNS Now, like we cover Biden, but only if it's in a religious context. We're not just covering him doing, whatever the daily presidential duties are. So I think the name changed in 94-ish, I believe, to Religion News Service instead of Religious News Service. But I can't speak more to the specifics of how they came up with the original name. And we are still, RNS, I don't know if I mentioned this before, RNS is still a newswire. We were first and foremost a newswire at our inception, and we are still a newswire, although we also are now, we aspire to be, a destination for readers. And we offer, as I mentioned, we offer podcasts and other things that don't go out to on our news wire service. So I'll end with that.
We have a question from James Finley. He was wondering, is there a possibility of sending other images to the program? And if so, how can that be done?
I think James probably means archival images, so historic images. We do definitely accept photographs into our collection. And if they are specifically religious news service images, I think it's possible we already have them. But again, there are gaps in our collection. We collect broadly in these types of images for this time period. For example, we hold the records also for the National Council of Churches, and there are photographs that cover some similar topics. Some of them actually do show up in the RNS collection because they were picked up and disseminated by Religious News Service. But we have other photographs that document the National Council of Churches and their activities. So yes, I mean, we are definitely interested in a broader, not just narrowly Presbyterian focus, but a broader kind of both ecumenical and interfaith documentation of religious photographs during the 20th century in particular. So yes, please reach out.
Cheryl was wondering, where are the RNS photos since the 1980s, and will they eventually be archived?
I very much hope that they will eventually be archived wherever they might be. RNS had a variety of owners over in its history, and so our archives jumped around to different places. And so specifically where archives are from 1980 on, I'm not sure. I know that I have some archives with me, and so I'm not sure of the exact location, and I don't think there is an exact location. I think they're spread out here and there, unfortunately. So the greatest number is by far with PHS, like the without doubt. So from 1980 on, wherever it is I'm guessing broken up into smaller bits, and unfortunately.
And Kit, we have another question for you from Susan. She was wondering if you have photographers on the payroll around the world, or is it freelance and then, you know, RNS buys the rights to the photos?
It is. So now we have freelancers. We do not have staff photographers based elsewhere. RNS is a very small service compared to any of the big names like a Reuters or AP or Getty. Yeah, when we have the need, I hire freelancers elsewhere. So yeah.
I have a question. I was wondering how the RNS collection at PHS differs from other collections at PHS.
Well, I mean, it's definitely the largest photographic collection that we have. Like, it's essentially a photo morgue for a news agency. So in that sense, it's the only collection like that. We have other collections of ecumenical organizations as well. The American Sunday School Union, the National Council of Churches, and then we have noticed some overlap between the National Council of Churches photograph collections that we have, where, you know, maybe they were sharing images with each other. But this is definitely the one collection, photographic collection of this size that we have. And Nancy may want to add on to that a bit.
It struck me when Natalie and I were doing the very careful examination of each image in a box and the surrounding context for it, that there's actually very little pure Presbyterian content in the Religious News Service photo archives. So in that way, this collection definitely stands out. Presbyterians worked a lot, especially across with other Protestant denominations, and they were very involved in things like refugee support, immigration, social justice issues. So it's not that Presbyterians were not very actively involved in the topics that are covered by Religious News Service, but the Presbyterian content is very small, but I think you can put that together with a lot of the other records that we hold, and in particular, the National Council of Churches records, and get a really great kind of documentation and rich storytelling potential by using these different sources. So the RNS collection is really unique among our holdings for a lot of different reasons. And we are so glad to be able to provide better access to it. For a long time, we were doing our best to preserve the collection and describe it on the box level, but researchers really had to come to PHS, and it was kind of hard to determine which of all of these boxes might contain the information you were looking for. And it was really the staff that started to really actively dive into the boxes of photographs. We were initially looking for images to accompany some of our civil rights communications. And like I personally, the more I went in there and saw the content of the photographs and how rich it was, it's like, we need to do more. I mean, we need to be able to bring these images to a much wider audience. And we needed to do preservation work, because as Natalie mentioned, the acetate negatives were deteriorating. So it's just been a wonderful experience for the staff here. And I think it's to be able to share what was in here in a kind of very well described way, so people can search on their computers from home and access these images. It's been very gratifying for us, and we really do want to continue to expand that with various partners.
I think that's all the questions we have. I think we're gonna wrap up, and before we do that, I just want to thank everyone for attending tonight and hearing a little bit about this incredible collection. And I also want to thank Kit for joining us this evening. Working with the folks over at the Religion News Service has been such a pleasure over the past couple of years, and his colleagues, especially Emily and Andrea, who've been a huge kind of part of helping us share these collections. It's really just been amazing working with you all. So we really appreciate you joining, and the future collaborations we'll continue to have. So thank you, Kit.
Thank you.
And I thought before we closed, I would also like to ask all of the panelists one last question, which is, if they'd like to share their favorite image, if they've shared it in the slides, or if they want to talk about their favorite image, or maybe a favorite topic that they've come across in the Religious News Service collection. So I guess we'll end it with kind of sharing of a favorite image, and I'll start by sharing. Actually, I'll share my screen. No, I won't, because I went away. But the image I shared at the top of the session was an image of Eugene Carson Blake, who was the moderator of the UPC USA, and it was an image taken by a Religious News Service photographer, and Eugene Carson Blake was being arrested for an attempt to desegregate a amusement park in Maryland. And it's a really amazing image, and one I think that's important to Presbyterians. And so that is one of my favorite images that was part of the RNS collection.
I'm sorry I didn't bring it up and prepare it, but one of my favorite sets of images, just because I thought it was interesting that RNS was capturing two sides of an argument. A same protest and a counter protest was happening at the Capitol, and it was a pro-life movement and a pro-choice movement. So it was really interesting seeing photographs of the same exact event, like probably minutes apart. I just thought it was really, really cool.
I don't have a specific photograph in mind, but just, you know, the photos from the civil rights movement and various social justice protests stick out in my mind. I think those are the images that I've looked at the most. And they're powerful, and like Kit has shown in his slides, the parallels to present day are what make them even more powerful to look at now. So just mention that genre overall.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I'll just add that there are some images that are not stage portraits, but really focus on one or two individuals in a moment of prayer or kind of contemplation or reflection. And there are just some really powerful images of ordinary people in those kinds of moments in really different contexts. So both in the United States and abroad. And when I think about those over time and over very kind of different contexts and geography, it just reminds me of the power of kind of religious images to tell stories like that, and how there's a lot of commonalities despite, you know, different denominations, different religious beliefs. So that's what I would lift up.
There's so many that it's hard to remember specifics, but one that I pointed out was that the hunting club that was had a Bible study before they went out, and I love so much about the photo that it's their attire tells you so much about when it was, the type of boots they had, that they all had like plaid shirts on with, you know, with small jackets over me. I feel like today everybody would be in camo. And so to Nancy's point of just seeing like everyday people and religious expression and the impact that it can have, that in particular photo, I always love. So.
Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we hope you'll tune in for future PHS live sessions. So we look forward to hosting you again. So take care.